Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here in Iqaluit on the territory of Inuit to share some ideas with you. My name is Kyle Hill, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization called Teach for Canada. We work with Northern First Nations communities in Ontario, so Northern Ontario, to recruit teachers, prepare teachers, and support teachers who deliver community-oriented and culturally responsive education in the classroom. So I also visited the Inukshuk High School yesterday. Go Huskies. And I know from conversations there and conversations around Iqaluit over the past few days that education is crucially important to Nunavut. And I also know through my work in Northern Ontario, where education is also very important, that when working in Indigenous education, the most important voice is always that of Indigenous peoples. So as a non-Indigenous person, I've thought hard about what I can share tonight to make a contribution. But what I do know is numbers. My academic background is physics and mathematics. I spent 3 years working in business and finance. So tonight, I'm going to share 3 numbers with you. The first one is 3,500. Each year, Canada spends $3,500 less on each First Nations student on reserve than off-reserve peers in public schools across the country, on average. $3,500 less every year. So that means when a First Nations on-reserve student reaches high school, the country has invested $35,000 less in them than in their off-reserve peers on average. This is a huge funding gap. Can you imagine what a First Nation anywhere could do with $3,500 more per student per year? For a school with 300 students, that's $1 million a year, where you could hire 10 more teachers and lower class sizes. You could invest in language and history and arts and sports and culture and performing arts, which I know is a priority here in Iqaluit. You could do a whole lot with $3,500 more per year per student. The second number is 21. In Flyin communities in Northern Ontario, there are 21 First Nations that don't have a high school in the community, which means that when a student is 15 years old, they need to make a choice. Leave home and go to high school, or stay home and drop out of high school. That's a really uncomfortable and suffocating choice for a young person to make. To get to that stage and to look around and wonder, what should I do with school because I can't go to high school in my community, that is impossible. And could you imagine if all those communities did have high schools, and if students could look around and see friends and peers and family graduating from high school at home, and how that would change their view of school and of high school and of education. The final number is 2,000. 2,000 is the difference between the number of classrooms on First Nations reserves across Canada and the number of teachers in Canada who self-identify as First Nations. So there is a shortage of 2,000 teachers. That is if every First Nations teacher decided to teach in a First Nations community. And that's saying nothing of students, First Nations students who go to school off reserve, or the benefit that a non-First Nations student could have by having a First Nations teacher. Clearly, we need more First Nations teachers and more Indigenous teachers overall. So these numbers say a lot. $3,500 per year per student in a funding gap. 21 schools, fly-in communities in Northern Ontario that don't have high schools in their community. Thousands more Indigenous educators needed across the country. There are some bright spots. In Northern Ontario, which I know best, an internet high school has come to service some communities so that kids can stay home and do high school over internet. The federal government is making a lot of promises around funding for education on reserves. And here in Nunavut, in Iqaluit, where we're having these Walrus Talks, there's a lot of amazing things happening. I've learned about the Nunavut Teacher Education Program, which trains Inuit in Nunavut to teach and to infuse language and history and culture into education, and that sounds amazing. I've learned that communities here do have high schools, and kids can go to high school in their own community and don't have to face that choice to leave. So I've heard a lot of amazing things. But if we truly desire a better country, if we truly want to change these numbers, then it takes all of us, not just governments, but all of us to step up and do something. And there are lots of individuals and organizations doing things across the country, like Teach for Canada, the organization I work for. And I would love to share just 2 lessons that I have learned and my organization has learned in working in this space. The first may be obvious here, but it's not obvious everywhere. Indigenous peoples have to be at the center of anything involving Indigenous peoples. At Teach for Canada, our board of directors is majority Indigenous peoples. We have a First Nations Community Advisory Council, which meets twice a year to inform and guide everything we do. We make a priority to involve Indigenous peoples in everything, because if we don't, we will repeat the same mistakes that this country has made for centuries. And second, thing I've learned, a thing we have learned, is to listen and to learn. Before we launched our organization, we listened for 3 years as volunteers with some idea, and then we listened and we learned and we changed the idea and we shaped it and it became a totally different thing. And had we not spent 3 years listening and learning, it may not be working and it may not have been what it is. We have two eyes and 2 ears and only one mouth, so we should be listening and learning at least twice as much as we're speaking. So to close, I think Canada needs to get this right. Canada needs to change these numbers. Canada needs to get the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples right. It's about justice. It's about reconciliation. It's about refusing to be satisfied with a status quo that comes in the footsteps of centuries of oppression. And I hope that in 150 years, Canada's epitaph doesn't read that we didn't have the courage to do something to try to get this right. I hope it doesn't read that we sat back and let things carry on as it did, but I hope that my generation's legacy is one where we can reinvent how we think about and how we act on the relationship with Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And if we can do that, if we can change the numbers that I mentioned, and if we can change mindsets, then I think we'll have made a very long-term impact on how we fundamentally see ourselves as a country. Thank you very much.